how influence flows, loops, and rewires society. From the top down, the societal control structure consists of 1. Rulers and elites, 2. Governments plus security plus bureaucracy, 3. Markets and firms plus finance, 4. Infrastructure and platforms plus media and knowledge, 5. Culture, 6. Community and civil society, 7. Identity, and finally 8. The individual. The power ladder stretches from palace to pavement. It is a living circuit and a web of channels where money, legitimacy, information, and force dance in constant motion. Formal blueprints suggest tidy hierarchies, yet in practice the system behaves like an ecosystem, not a bureaucracy. A royal decree can raise fuel prices in distant towns within days. A viral video filmed on a phone can topple a cabinet. A tweak in a recommendation algorithm can redirect billions of advertising dollars and reshape a national conversation. What looks like command from above depends on consent and compliance from below. What looks like insurgency from below depends on symbols and tools shaped above. The result is not a static pyramid but a dynamic feedback machine where every layer both pushes downward and listens upward. This map presents 8 layers that together compose the working infrastructure of modern power. At the top are rulers and global elites whose reach crosses borders and industries. Governments and their administrative organs convert strategy into law and enforcement. Markets and finance allocate resources that make some futures cheap and others prohibitive. Infrastructure and media determine what can connect to what and whose voice is heard. Culture and knowledge institutions decide what counts as true, normal, and admirable. Community and civil society turn personal conviction into organized force. Identity shapes loyalties and perception, translating the world into allies, opponents, and opportunities. At the base, the individual acts within constraints, yet remains the ultimate censor and actuator of the whole system. Read this not as a ranking of importance, but as a wiring diagram. If any single channel clogs, flows, reroute. If a narrative loses legitimacy, even vast coercive capacity can fail. If an innovation changes cost curves, entire layers reorganize around the new feasibility frontier. The task, then, is to understand both the downward pressures that shape daily life and the upward signals that keep power responsive or reveal it as brittle. 1. Rulers, global elites. At the summit of the power pyramid sit actors able to bend or suspend the formal rules that constrain everyone else. They include royal courts, politburos, dynastic business families, sovereign wealth funds, and the ultra-concentrated nodes of global finance. Their authority rests on 3 pillars: control of large-scale coercive force, such as state militaries, private security, and intelligence agencies, discretionary command over capital flows, and privileged access to agenda-setting arenas such as the UN Security Council or the G7. A single OPEC plus production cut can raise gasoline prices from Lagos to Los Angeles, rewriting household budgets and election odds. When the Norwegian government pension fund blacklists a mining firm for environmental abuses, investors worldwide dump the stock within hours. Yet history shows that elite tenure is always provisional. The Bourbon monarchy collapsed once credit markets refused further loans, and Soviet nomenclatura evaporated after a legitimacy crisis spread from Chernobyl to Afghanistan. Consequently, elites cultivate durability through soft power projects such as endowing universities, underwriting mega events like world fairs, or launching philanthropic moonshots, all designed to convert raw dominance into a narrative of enlightened stewardship. Because their fortunes are ultimately priced in the stability, productivity, and consent of lower layers, they monitor unrest data, bond spreads, and social media sentiment almost as closely as military briefings. 2. Governments, administrative state. Governments operationalize sovereign power by converting broad strategic aims into binding law, regulation, and spending. Executive leaders, technocratic ministries, legislatures, courts, and independent central banks form an intricate apparatus that taxes, redistributes, adjudicates, and polices. Through fiscal levers, they decide whether a generation studies tuition-free or graduates shackled by debt. Through zoning codes, they dictate whether cities sprawl or densify, and through security organs, they can guarantee civil peace or perpetrate state terror. The European Union. General Data Protection Regulation re-engineered global data practices in fewer than 24 months, illustrating how a single legal regime can reshape multinational business models. Yet governments are porous. Lobbyists draft bills, think tanks supply white papers, international courts review statutes, and voters, or in authoritarian contexts, street crowds and palace factions, can end careers overnight. Administrative inertia both empowers and constrains. The Indian demonetization policy in 2016 revealed how a command from the top can falter against creaky cash distribution networks. Conversely, independent agencies such as the US Federal Reserve can crash speculative manias by a mere quarter-point rate signal, demonstrating that within the state itself, power is distributed, rivalrous, and self-correcting. 3. Markets, firms, and finance. Markets translate human ingenuity and desire into prices, wages, and investment streams, allocating society's surplus toward projects deemed most profitable or least risky by investors. Multinationals spanning continents negotiate tax holidays larger than the education budgets of the states that host them, while private equity funds arbitrage nursing homes and broadband networks alike. Financial plumbing, including interbank benchmarks, repo markets, and cross-border payment messaging acts as circulatory tissue linking provincial savings accounts to skyscraper trading floors. When the 2008 mortgage-backed securities bubble burst, unemployment in Spain quadrupled and rice riots flared in Haiti, illustrating the planetary reach of balance sheet contagion. Markets also discipline policy. A credit rating downgrade can instantly raise sovereign borrowing costs, forcing austerity, whereas a surge of venture capital into renewables can push parliaments to accelerate grid upgrades. Yet consumer culture and activism push back. The swift rise of plant-based meat forced a protein giant to spin up an alternative division, and meme stock swarms on social platforms vaporized a hedge fund short position in a retail chain. Environmental, social, and governance metrics, once fringe, now guide trillions in assets, showing that market rationality is itself socially constructed and perpetually renegotiated. 4. Infrastructure, platforms and media. Material and digital infrastructure constitutes the substrate on which modern life unfolds. High-voltage interconnectors, rare earth supply chains, and submarine fiber lines coexist with cloud regions, app stores, satellite constellations, and artificial intelligence inference clusters. Gatekeeping power resides in firms like large cloud providers, super apps, and satellite internet networks whose policy changes can disable entire business ecosystems or determine internet access during war. Algorithms mediate attention. A short video feed can catapult an unknown singer into global charts within days, while a news ranking tweak on a major social network in 2018 crashed traffic to independent outlets and boosted partisan sites, altering electoral discourse in Brazil and the United States. These systems extract granular telemetry such as eye-tracking data in virtual reality headsets, clickstream logs, and geolocation pings, feeding models that refine persuasion and pricing. Infrastructural fragility is likewise political capital. A ransomware attack on a major fuel pipeline illustrated how a single, compromised billing server could trigger panic buying across the eastern United States. Regulators oscillate between antitrust fines, data localization mandates, and the temptation to weaponize platforms for surveillance. Meanwhile, creators and users form counter-publics including cooperatives, federated social networks, and pirate radio to reclaim bandwidth and narrative space. 5. Culture. Knowledge institutions. Culture furnishes the semantic code of society, authored collectively by universities, research institutes, religious traditions, entertainment industries, fashion houses, and online subcultures. It defines what is admirable, taboo, and conceivable. The scientific revolution recast alchemy as chemistry, and the civil rights movement recategorized segregation from custom to moral abomination. Education systems embed these scripts early. Japanese moral education classes emphasize harmony, while American civics textbooks valorize individual rights, tilting societal baselines in divergent directions. Mass media multiplies reach. When the television drama Dallas aired in 1980s Romania, it inadvertently showcased consumer abundance, accelerating delegitimization of the regime. Today, pop culture fandom boosts South Korean soft power, and global streaming platforms act as informal ambassadors for United States multiculturalism. Knowledge institutions confer epistemic legitimacy. Publication in a top scientific journal can trigger billions in biotech investment, while a papal encyclical reshapes Catholic social teaching worldwide. Yet they are contested terrains. Funding streams bias research agendas, authoritarian states promote patriotic history, and digital disinformation networks create epistemic smog. Cultural hegemony remains provisional, constantly rewritten by artistic avant-gardes, activist hashtags, and paradigm-shifting scientific anomalies. 6. Community, civil society. Civil society occupies the meso-level where private conviction crystallizes into organized power. Labor unions bargain wages affecting macroeconomic demand, faith networks mobilize voters from São Paulo favelas to Seoul megachurches, and parent-teacher associations influence curricula one library book at a time. Mutual aid groups like Bed-Stuy Strong delivered groceries during pandemic lockdowns faster than official agencies, proving agility born of local trust. Non-governmental organizations translate moral urgency into policy drafts, as seen when a medical relief organization leveraged field reports to pressure the United Nations on Syrian chemical weapon attacks. Social movements periodically redraw the civic landscape. Occupy Wall Street reframed inequality in a single slogan, and the Me Too movement traversed languages and legal systems to tighten harassment laws from Sweden to South Korea. Yet civil society can be corporatized or coerced. A foreign agent label throttled independent election monitors in Russia, and carefully calibrated charity regulations in some cities limit protest by mandating institutional neutrality. Funding dependence introduces subtle drift. A human rights organization reliant on large technology company grants may prioritize content moderation workshops over structural antitrust battles. Still, the sector's polycentric nature makes it a reservoir of dissent, experiment, and solidarity. 7. Identity. Identity synthesizes lived experience into social location and political meaning, fusing ancestry, language, faith, gender, sexuality, class, profession, ideology, and consumption style. It provides shortcuts for trust and coalition, but also fault lines for conflict. Political entrepreneurs weaponize identity by narrating grievances, with examples including sovereignty themes in Brexit, civilizational pride in some South Asian campaigns, and targeted appeals to suburban mothers or Rust Belt workers in the United States. Corporate marketers tailor micro-segments. Inclusive cosmetics lines or athletic hijabs acknowledge customer identities previously ignored. Identities evolve. Census data show a surge in people selecting multiple races, while new labels compete in linguistic self-definition. Digital platforms accelerate bricolage. Some fandoms ally across causes, while extremist forums blend archaic symbols with meme culture. Legal codifications may freeze categories such as passbooks under apartheid or internal residency permits in some countries, yet bottom-up shifts can explode those formalities as seen when a South American nation recognized non-binary national IDs. Because identity shapes perception of interests, its reconfiguration can flip electoral maps, crash brand reputations, or unblock stymied reforms. 8. The individual. At the base resides the autonomous yet embedded person, endowed with consciousness, labor power, and the capacity for imagination. Each individual's agency is circumscribed by material constraints including income, health, and legal status, and symbolic frames including norms, algorithms, and identity scripts. Nevertheless, aggregated individual actions drive macro outcomes. A single teenage school strike by a Swedish student snowballed into millions, marching for climate justice, and forced asset managers to price carbon risk. Millions of quiet resignations during 2021 and 2022 rewrote labor market bargaining, compelling major firms to embrace remote work. Consumer micro-choices such as streaming rather than buying DVDs, switching to plant-based milk, or deleting a social network account cascade through supply chains and valuation models. Yet influence need not be heroic. Everyday compliance with traffic laws, tax codes, or religious rituals stabilizes institutions, while widespread micro-evasions from private network use in censored states to cash-only transactions in debt crises erode them. Digital footprints feed machine learning loops that in turn shape the ads, news, and dating options individuals encounter, demonstrating reflexivity between choice and structure. Ultimately, individuals are both censors and actuators of the entire hierarchy. Their aspirations supply the data, revenue, votes, and moral temperature that signal when policies succeed, markets boom, cultures shift, or regimes face reckoning. Power is a choreography, not a monologue. Commands descend as laws, prices, platform policies, syllabi, and sermons. Signals ascend as legitimacy, data, tax receipts, turnout, donations, and the subtle sway of fashion and language. When the system is healthy, these flows balance and self-correct. Governments adjust policy before discontent hardens. Markets finance solutions instead of bubbles. Platforms amplify knowledge rather than noise. Culture makes room for dissent and reinvention. Communities channel grievance into reform rather than nihilism. Identities broaden and overlap rather than harden into walls. Individuals feel efficacious rather than fatalistic. When the system corrodes, the same channels amplify fragility. A narrative loses moral purchase, and the top discovers that force cannot substitute for consent. Infrastructure concentrations turn into single points of failure. Speculation cannibalizes productive investment. Culture fragments into warring echo chambers. Communities are tamed or crushed until pressure escapes in more volatile forms. Identities calcify and simplify. Individuals retreat into cynicism, disconnection, or rage. The circuitry still hums, but it no longer computes a shared future. Understanding this living circuit matters because it restores agency at every layer. The top can invest in legitimacy rather than theatrics. The middle can build resilient infrastructure and plural institutional bases. The base can organize with eyes open to how tools and narratives shape the very terrain of struggle. Power will always flow. The challenge is to tune the feedback so that it builds a society worth inheriting.